Welcome back to the next video in our series from medieval to modern, and we're talking again about the music of the Baroque period, and specifically about the violin and about concertos. Now, in the Baroque period, they began to focus on instrumental music, and there was no instrument they valued more highly than the violin. Many Baroque composers believed that the violin's tone had expressive powers that were very much like those of the human voice. You could get the vibrato in there, you could slide from note to note. And so violins were the leaders of what was known as a trio sonata. Now the word sonata, let's see, I'll write it down for you here. I forgot to put it up on the board. So sonata. Sonata literally means sound or sound piece. Now, those of you may remember there's a car that was called a Sonata, and I always wondered if the person who named that car understood that sonata was actually a musical term. So anyway, the Trio Sonata, which is kind of a misnomer because there were actually 4 instruments. There were 2 violins, a cello, which is a much lower string instrument, and a harpsichord. So that's actually 4 instruments in a trio sonata. But the reason they called it a trio sonata was that the cello played the same music as did the harpsichordist's left hand. So there were really only 3 independent parts, and so it's called a trio. So the trio sonata consisted of a few short movements. There were some that were real fast and then some that were really slow. And I'm going to give you an example of a trio sonata. I'm going to put a link to that. You can go to a different YouTube video and you'll be able to hear something by Domenico Gallo from the 18th century and a movement from one of his trio sonatas. The other type of instrumental composition is known as a concerto. I know it looks like it says concerto, but it's concerto. And the concerto called for a larger group of instruments than did the trio sonata. So in a concerto, a soloist or a small group of soloists contrasted with the larger ensemble. Now, even a larger orchestra or ensemble in the Baroque period was typically much smaller than today's symphony orchestra. I don't know if any of you have ever been to an orchestra concert, but you look up on the stage and you'll see maybe 80, 90, even 100 musicians up there. Well, the Baroque orchestra was much smaller than that. And so you had the orchestra, and then you had maybe one violin player or a violinist and a cellist or something like that in front of the orchestra. And in a sense, the orchestra was accompanying the violinist, and then the violinist would step back and let the orchestra play. And so there was that contrast of big sound and smaller sound. Now, there's a very famous violin concerto that almost everybody's heard of, and it's called The 4 Seasons by Antonio Vivaldi. Kind of have to say it that way. Antonio Vivaldi. And I'm going to share a link for you to go and hear the final movement of The 4 Seasons, which is called Autumn. And that is a movement that represents the hunt. Now, whether you're for or against hunting is not relevant at this time, but I think you will enjoy this piece of music, and it might be familiar to some of you. So, things I want you to remember from this video is how the violin became the prominent instrument in Baroque music. You learn about what the concerto is, and also the trio sonata. Instrumental music became very important during the Baroque era. If you go back over some of the earlier musical periods that we covered, you'll notice that there was a lot of vocal music, a lot of singing. Well, that, of course, continued on in the Baroque period as well, but also instrumental music became very important to the composers of that period and to the audiences that listened to the music. Okay, thank you for watching, and in our next video, we're going to spend one more video talking about the music of the Baroque era. So far, we've talked about the religious music and the instrumental music, And in this last video, I want to talk more about keyboard music, because that also became very prominent and very popular in the Baroque era. And it paved the way for the rise of the piano in the classical era. So we're going to talk about that next time, but for now, thanks for watching. Please like the video because that helps the channel, and subscribe, that also helps the channel. And I look forward to talking to you in the next one.